I'm here to talk about what it means to be agile and how I came to understand this. I work in software development, been doing this about 25 years now, but I do not have a degree in engineering or even computer science. My Bachelor of Science is in psychology, and I came to that major fairly late. Ever since I was a little kid, one of my aspirations was to become a doctor. So I started out in college as a biology major. And then my academic advisor told me I'd have to take something like 10 hours of botany. And I was like, plants? How is this relevant to being a physician? So then I toyed with biochemistry, thinking that I eventually wanted to specialize in women's health or maybe psychiatry. So I landed on a psychology major. Although honestly, that felt like a bit of a step backwards to me because psychology has always been considered a soft science. And I was very concerned back then about what people thought of me, how others see me, or rather, my perception of how others see me. But I took a couple of classes, one in child development and one in cognitive psychology, and you know that feeling when something just clicks? You know, when you feel like this, I totally get this. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I kept taking classes in experimental psychology and behavioral pharmacology and psychology in the law. And I did an undergraduate research practicum and an undergrad teaching practicum. And I was all set to graduate with honors. And then life happened. And I lost my confidence and my sense of self. And that last semester, I limped into graduation, got my degree, and got the heck out. Started working full-time at the VA Medical Center where I'd been clerking on a college work-study program. I thought, maybe one day I'll go back to being me, back to medical school, maybe graduate school. And eventually, as careers go, that first gig at VA morphed into a computer specialist position on the VA's computerized patient record system. They sent me to Boston for a week to take a course on M programming. Have you ever even heard of M? Monk's language? Yeah, I thought not. So I took this course to make me a programmer. But what I really was doing was training physicians and medical students on using CPRS to enter their lab orders and their x-ray orders, and most important, gathering all the data needed to make treatment decisions. And eventually, after one of these training classes, a particularly eager resident who was obviously geeked out by all this patient informatics, he came to me and said, how can I use this record system to speed up my documentation and make ordering easier? And I said, you should ask. My department is working on these things called order sets, which are collections of orders that you would routinely write for different protocols, like a rule-out MI or a total knee replacement. And he's like, well, that's great, but could you work with me to make my own order sets? And not just that, but to pull the lab results and other information to my progress notes. And so we did that. And soon I had other residents coming to me saying, hey, how do I get some of so-and-so's order sets? That guy is making us all look bad during morning rounds with our attending. And I really loved that job. But as you may know, the VA is a government agency. And not only that, it's closely affiliated with the Department of Defense. So wheels turn very slowly. There's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape, and not to mention inefficient business practices. I was once on a committee where we literally sat and talked for an hour about what was said on a different committee. And then my best friend, Josh, who had also moved from a work-study position into full-time employment, he left VA and went to work for a software company. And after a few months, he said, you got to come work here. You will love it here. So I interviewed, and they liked me. And I scored a second interview with the vice president of engineering, a man named Haas Mashlab. And I couldn't happen to be related to Anne Marie Mashlab, who, through a bit of pre-interview research I had done, I already knew to be his wife. And Haas's face lit up, and he said, "How do you know my Anne Marie?" So I told him I'd worked with her at VA during her medical residency when the computerized patient record system was first being implemented. But I left out the part that my boss at VA didn't get along with Anne Marie because Anne Marie had once intimated that this software system we were pushing sucked and that her husband could have written something much better. So I started working for this software company in QA in the same department as my friend Josh. And within a couple of months, our boss Haas came to me and said, "I have an opportunity for you," which in Haas speak often meant, "I have an offer that you should not refuse." And he said, "I see you have a Bachelor of Science degree. Do you want to be a programmer?" And me, not wanting to say no to my new employer, said, "Yes, sir." And so I was given a book on C++ in 2 weeks to read it, and bam, I'm a programmer. And I started to work writing code under the watchful eye of a very brilliant senior engineer. And I still didn't feel like a programmer because I lacked the engineering background and training of my colleagues. I even convinced the company to send me to a night class at University of Iowa in object-oriented programming, so I would stop feeling like such an imposter. But I never really felt that I fit the role. So, as businesses tend to go, eventually this software company was bought by another company, and that company went bankrupt. They were forced to sell off all their assets and their IP, and the companies that were able to take on our various projects extended contract offers to the engineers that they wanted to keep. I, being a junior coder, was not offered a contract. So Haas said, "I'm spinning up a new company, just a few of us employees, and I'd like you to come over as a Java developer." And of course I said yes. And then a few years went by and things were going great. And then life happened again. And because my personal struggles were taking up so much of my attention, I couldn't focus at work. And thus, being merely competent and not truly skilled as a programmer, I wasn't excelling, and I was miserable. So I went to Haas and said, "I need to make a change. Either I need to get back into QA, which I have a real passion for, or I need to leave the company and find other work. I would be grateful if you would give me a reference." And Haas was quiet for just a moment. And then he said, "I'd like you to stay. Let's find something else for you to work on," which for several weeks was a series of odd jobs, including working on the company's website. And eventually I summoned up the courage to go back to Haas and say, "I really think that now is the time for me to go back to QA." And he said, "Sure, we can do that. And then when you're feeling up to it, we'll get you back into coding where you belong." And I said, "No, that's not where I belong. I love QA. I'm good at it. Not merely competent, but really good at it. It suits me, and I'm still learning. You could hire qualified engineers right out of college, and inside of a year, they will be more competent than I will ever be. You should put me in QA." I think of that now as my, "You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall." And I smiled and said, "Whatever makes you happy." And so I spent the next 12 years in QA. And sometime after I become a senior QA engineer, our company finally ditched the waterfall method we've been using, which honestly had been working well for us for several years. But we recognized that to continue as a viable business, we needed to become agile. And so we instituted agile methodologies and started practicing Scrum. I'm pretty sure we were all given a book to read on how to do this. And about a year into this journey, Haas brought in a company called Back to conduct an intensive 2-day Agile boot camp. The attendees for this session were engineers, scrum masters, and leadership, including Haas himself. And our trainer for this session was a man named Doug Shimp, who was the founder of 3Back. He told us his origin story. As a young man, maybe only in high school, he started painting houses in his neighborhood as a way to make some money. And through word of mouth, he painted some more houses, and then he hired a couple of people to help him. And suddenly this little side job had become a full-fledged business. And that's where he got the name for this other company, 3Back. It's a term professional painters use. When you're painting a wall, you're up close and personal with the work, too close. So you take a step back to look at what you've done. Did you miss a spot? And after you've touched that spot up, you take 3 steps back, so now you can see the whole picture. You need to put another coat of paint on it. And man, oh man, right then, I was hooked. That's brilliant. And then Doug talked about his degrees in biochemistry and a long list of credentials that followed. And if that weren't enough, Doug moved on to quoting and citing the work of several noted psychologists and their advances in brain science. I'm pretty sure one of the psychologists that he mentioned was Jean Piaget, whose research has contributed to the growth of developmental psychology, cognitive psychology, genetic epistemology, education reform. And that was when I had my moment. That the sun comes out and all the angels start to sing moment, right? And I was like, this is really what I want to do with my life. And I almost walked up to Doug right then and there and said, are you hiring? Please, take me with you. I want to spread this message. Okay, not really. I would never consider leaving a project before it was complete, or at least until I felt I'd done all I could do with it. But this 3Back Agile training, I was energized because finally Doug Shimp had given me the link between my training and my colleagues' training, the tool I was going to use to finally communicate with trained engineers. Because I had that link when I was working with physicians at VA. I had not only studied the same subjects in school, biology, chemistry, genetics, I spoke their language, and because of that, they saw me as an expert in my field, while also being knowledgeable in theirs. And even better, they saw me as a resource, someone who could help them make sense of information and to excel at their jobs. Doug had finally given me the vocabulary to say what I had been trying to say ever since I became a QA engineer. Listen to me. I've learned so much from all of you, and I have something to teach you. Something I know from my education and my interests. I can use all of that to help us be better at our common goal. So, after Doug's intro to this training, our leadership talked a little bit about the background of our company and our industry, how the way we were doing Agile looked a little bit different from what he was outlining, owing to our unique business demands and the needs of our customers. And Doug stood there for a moment, stone-faced, and he said, that's nice. But what you're doing isn't Agile. And I could feel the temperature in the room drop by like 10 degrees. Here was this guy, this biochemist, telling us that we didn't know what we were doing, that our approach was all wrong. And I think it angered and offended more than a few people in the room. But I had totally drunk the Kool-Aid by this point. I was already so connected with Doug's message that I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on this other way of doing Agile. And then he led us through an exercise that I will remember for the rest of my life. Actually, I had to ask some of my colleagues this past week to jog my memory about it, because although I totally remembered the setup and the punchline of this exercise, I'd forgotten the details. So to the best of my recollection, here's what it was. we had to break off into pairs. One person would be the instructor, delivering the directions about how to accomplish a task. The other person would be the instructee. And the task was for the instructee to walk around a table. But here's the catch. They had to do it in a precise number of steps. You had to get from the origin point around the table back to your seat in something like 40 steps. No more, no less. And it was made abundantly clear that if you didn't succeed at this task, you would both be called out as having failed. So we broke up into teams, and I was paired with a software engineer named Corey. Really nice guy. Not long out of college and full of enthusiasm and eager to learn. I'd been working directly with him for a while on the same Scrum team. So I turned to Corey and I said, would you rather be the instructor or the instructee? And he hesitated, so I said, how about I be the instructee and you the instructor? And then he sort of, smiled and shrugged his shoulders. So I said, okay, no problem. I'll drive. And I'm looking around the room, and all the other teams are already getting down to work and figuring out how they're going to do the task, measuring the distance around the table and calculating how they're going to achieve the precise number of steps and the stride length they're going to need to accomplish it. And then I turned to Corey and I said, so how do you want to do this? I see some instructors just standing there and giving the directions. I think that's a little weird, don't you? I mean, it's walking around a table. I feel kind of silly telling you how to do it. I think you could figure it out on your own. We're supposed to work together. Sure, I could walk around the table with you if that would help. I don't think that's what he meant. No one else is doing that. Corey, I know you know how to walk around a table. What if you just do that? Maybe take 40-ish steps. Don't worry about counting them. That's not really important. Corey's visibly nervous, and he's like, but I don't want to get us in trouble. I volunteered to drive. If we get in trouble, I'll take the heat for it. Trust me, we'll be fine. And then Corey does the thing you do where you agree with your mouth, and you shake your head no while you're smiling and, okay, if you think so. So Corey walked around the table and came back and sat down, and we talked about whether we should ask Doug for a reading list of psychology books that could teach us more about his way of doing Agile while all the other teams finished up. And after we came back together, Doug said, does someone want to talk about the process you followed to do this task? And someone explains their team's process of breaking down the task, and then Doug says, did you really need to do it that way? Would you accomplish the same goal by doing it differently? And with that, the point of the whole exercise became obvious. It wasn't about the task. One of the colleagues that I asked to jog my memory about this said that in his session, conducted a year or so later, the task presented was to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Same difference. It's not the way you solve the problem, as much as knowing and reaching the goal, understanding not only the what of the thing that you are doing, but the why. Sometimes the why not. What value does this bring? Do we need to sweat the details on this one? No? Well, then let's do the simplest reasonable thing and save our problem-solving skills and energy for the complex things. We also need to trust each other to be competent at what it is that we do. We need to train and coach each other to achieve competence, and then we need to mentor competent team members until they achieve mastery. And then we need to support those team members who've mastered their craft in discovering the next role that they want to excel at, and lift each other up to meet our personal goals. So Corey turns to me at this point. He's nodding up and down now, a look of amazement on his face, and he whispered, have you done this before? Did you know where he was going with this? And I answered, nope, no clue. But isn't it awesome? And my point today is not that the methodology doesn't matter. There are times to be precise and exacting in our work. We have requirements. and sometimes government regulations that we must adhere to. And we have a standard of care and ethical standards as professionals. But although the what is often defined by others, the how is up to us. And if we are truly being agile, if we are striving for well-formed teams, we do that in a way that capitalizes on each person's strengths, their knowledge, their past experiences. We need to remove the penalties for making mistakes, because where mistakes are happening, there's learning going on. And we need to encourage others to find the role that each individual sees themselves excelling in someday, which, if we do it right, is also a role that others recognize is natural and a good fit for that person, a role that we can support them in. And I'm not telling you that the benefit of applying Agile methodologies to our software development process isn't about informed product design and creating useful prototypes and defining the MVP and pushing out usable increments out to the customer more quickly than in waterfall, and iterating through this process and constantly upping our game to build better and better products. It is absolutely about all of those things. But being agile is so much more. We are so much more.